Hello everybody, my name is Michael Wagner. I teach at the Westphal College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And on this channel I talk about digital media, game design and spatial audio. Now today I would like to talk about DearVR Unity. Now what is DearVR Unity? DearVR Unity is a plugin for the Unity game development platform that extends some of the audio functionalities. It's not a middleware in the sense of audio kinetic wise. This is something I'm covering in the game audio tutorial that I'm currently publishing, or like Fmod. It is really a plugin that extends some of the functionality, and the advantage of that is we can stick with the Unity, with the internal audio engine, and we can simply add some functionality. Now on the disadvantage side, it's going to not be as powerful as some of the middleware. It's just going to add certain parts that we might find useful, and certain limited functionality that we might find useful, but it is nonetheless something that is very interesting. Now there are really three things that it adds. The first thing is it adds binaural rendering, and binaural rendering essentially means rendering with respect to my ears. So it is rendering the audio in a way that is true to the geometry of the head and the geometry of the ears, so that I get a full realistic impression of the audio sound. And then it's going to do two things which are basically almost identical. It's going to calculate reflections. So within the game, when we encounter a wall or we encounter some obstacles, it's going to render the audio or render reflections of the audio coming from that wall. And then as a third thing, it's going to add reverb. Now, I originally was a little bit confused why they make the differentiation between reflections and reverb, but that has practical consequences. The reflections are reverb essentially is just a convolution of reflections, really, that's what it is. But the reason they kind of differentiate is that the reverb part of DearVR is a traditional reverb plugin where you can use certain presets that render the audio in a certain way, whereas the reflections are actually done in real time dynamically in the scene. So it is actually really calculating the intersections with the geometry, and so in order to make sure that everything is running as efficiently as possible, my assumption is that they kind of differentiate between those two, one being rendered dynamically directly in the game and the other one being sort of faked, not really faked, but baked into the audio as a reverb effect. Now, if you're not familiar with DearVR or Dear Reality, it is a company that has a couple of interesting offerings, and we already talked a little bit about, on this channel, a little bit about DearVR Monitor, which is a monitoring solution for multi-channel audio. I have not yet touched the spatializer with the exception of the micro spatializer. That's actually one of the things I want to do in the near future, because what it really does, it adds a binaural rendering with a reverb to a music production environment. There's a very interesting solution that I'm just starting to get familiar with, which is the DearVR Spatial Connect. That is essentially a full virtual reality environment that allows you to move things around in three-dimensional space and play with it that way. What I would like to do today is I'd like to have a look at DearVR Unity. Now, in order to be sure that everybody is on the same page with me, I'm not paid by Dear Reality. I have not received anything, so I paid for these products myself. The reason I'm making this review is essentially because I find these offerings really interesting, and you might find them interesting as well. So with that being said, let's get to our little project. And what I have done is I have opened up essentially the playground that comes with the new first-person controller. Now, if you're following my game audio tutorial, you're aware with that. That's also the same thing that I used in the game audio tutorials. If not, I'm going to post the description in a link in the description that points you to where I talk about how to install it. For our particular purpose here in this review, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. Essentially, just we can use any environment really. But I chose this one because it has everything ready-made and it's very easy to use. So the first thing that we need to do in order to get the DearVR Unity plugin to work is we need to import the DearVR package, and this is done in the traditional way. It comes as a Unity package. Now be aware there's some browsers will actually download this as a zip file. So when you get the download link from DearVR Reality, it sometimes kind of downloads not as a Unity package, but it sort of pops up as a zip file or a GC file. If that happens, rename the extension to Unity package, because otherwise Unity doesn't know what to do with it. So it is a Unity package. In order to install that, we simply double click, and that will then bring in all the assets. These are all the assets. Let's import them, and they will then be added to my asset folder. And just a second. Okay, and here we are essentially with the DearVR assets. Now, in order to enable that, we need to go into the project settings. Once again, DearVR Unity is a plugin into Unity, so it actually takes advantage of the internal audio engine, and it plugs into the internal audio engine. So we need to tell Unity that we are actually having a plugin, and in order to do that, we go to the project settings, and in the project settings in the audio tab, there is an option here for a spatializer plugin. It's currently set to none, and what I want is I want to enable the DearVR engine, and that will essentially enable the DearVR engine. So that's the first thing that I need to do. I need to tell Unity that DearVR exists and that it should use that spatializer plugin to spatialize the sounds. Now, in order to make it work, there is one more thing I need to do. In every scene where I'm using DearVR, I need to add an object which is global to that particular scene that holds the DearVR manager, and the DearVR manager is responsible for essentially managing everything in the background. So if you have certain audio sources and things are routed around, the manager is just kind of being the parent object that sort of makes sure that everything is running correctly. So we need to add an empty object, and let's call that DearVR manager. And I'm going to add a DearVR manager component. So search for Dear. That will open up all the components that are provided through the DearVR Unity plugin. And what we want to add here is a DearVR manager. Now, the DearVR manager has a couple of options. The first one is an important one. That is the loudspeaker mode. As I said before, the main function of DearVR Unity is really as a binaural rendering plugin. So it renders the audio not as something that is played through loudspeakers, but rather something that is played through headphones. And it tries to recreate a realistic impression of the sound if listened to headphones. Now, this is important to understand that we cannot really use that with a loudspeaker system. So whenever that game is played on loudspeakers, it should actually be rendered with that setting off. And that is this loudspeaker mode for. So if you enable that, then essentially it is rendered according to regular stereo rendering, as if you would listen to that on a loudspeaker system. And if it is off, it is rendered in binaural mode. Now, I'm leaving it off because that's essentially exactly what we are testing today. There's also an automatic room analyzer. And what that automatic room analyzer does is it dynamically tries to figure out what the reflections of the sound should be. So when you're moving through the environment, the room analyzer is dynamically constantly checking the environment around you and is trying to figure out how the reflections should work. So if you're running against the wall and the wall is very reflective in terms of sound reflections, then you should actually hear that. And that's what this is for. We're going to enable that later. Let's just leave that off for a second. And you can, if you have the automatic room analyzer, you can either check, you can select what objects are actually reflective and what objects are not. And if you disable that, you can also give the system a manual room geometry. So for example, this is a scene that is in a fixed room, and then you can essentially define what the dimensions of that room are. Now, enough said, let's get right into creating a sound. And what we're going to do is I'm going to make something relatively simple. I'm just going to attach a sound to the player character here. And I'm just going to attach it right in front of the player character so that we can actually hear it in a spatialized way that is also making sure that we understand all the things that are happening within the game through the DearVR Unity plugin. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to add a new child, a new game object, and I'm going to call that test audio. So I'm just creating a little bit of an audio of an audio clip, Let me set that to 0. Actually, I can do that later, but that's fine. So let me just set that to 0 here. Then I'm going to add an audio component. Now, if you have a working game and there's already an audio source in the Unity audio source, then all you really need to do is you need to add a DearVR source to that as an additional component. The DearVR source is sort of an add-on to the audio source that adds this functionality. Now, if I'm currently don't really have an audio source on that object. So if I'm just adding a DearVR source, it's actually going to add an audio source for me as well. So the DearVR source component is looking for an audio source component. If one is there, it's just going to add itself. If no audio source component is there, I'm going to get an additional audio source component along with it. A couple of things I need to do here, I have not yet set up the audio clip, so that's going to come in a second. We first need to make sure that we are spatializing, so let's click on spatialize. Let's also bypass the reverb zones. We don't want to work with reverb zones here in this particular case. And then let's add a sound to it. Yeah, there's one more thing. Let's do the spatial blend. Let's set that to 3D completely so that we have a three-dimensional sound. And then let's add an audio clip. And the audio clip that I'm going to add is one of my own clips that I tend to use in my videos. Let me just drop that into the main asset directory. Actually, I'm not going to make a special subdirectory here. So I'm going to take that sound clip, which is a little 1-minute track, and let's move that in here. And then I'm going to also select the output. And for the output, let's look at the mixer. I said that essentially a couple of things that DearVR installs, and along with the demo, there comes already a mixer setting. So if you install the DearVR Unity plugin, what happens is that it also installs, or it also prepares the mixer for the demo session, and we can simply use that mixer for our current project. So this is the DearVR mixer, and it comes with the sources bus and 2 reverb buses. We are going to use those in a second. And what I want to do is really I want to route the audio into the sources bus. So I'm going to select that and simply going to go into sources. That will move that into that direction. And I think everything else is okay at the moment. So let's hear how that sounds, and let me take my headphones. Now there's one thing that I need to do. I need to attach that to the player character. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to attach that to the camera directly. So let's move that into the camera. Let's just make sure that the position is correct. We want that to be at 0, and the Y position should be essentially in about 1.5 meter. So and slightly in front of me to make sure that I'm actually getting a reasonably. Let's put that at 1 meter, like right in front of me, and actually that might be a little bit too high. Let me set that to 0 is fine. Yeah, and let's see how that sounds. So the audio is currently locked to my head position, to the camera position. And what it is doing, it is rendering that audio in binaural mode. So first things first. So what we want to do is we want to enable the reflections, and in order to get a more realistic effect. So when I'm entering the room, I would like to have certain, first of all, I would like to have a reverb, and I would like to have reflections, or kind of making sure that I'm actually hearing the sound in exactly the same way I would normally hear that when I'm entering that. So what we're going to do is we're going to enable the automatic room analyzer, and the automatic room analyzer is going to constantly check, are there any objects in front of me, and how do these objects affect the reflections that I'm getting from those objects. I can select what objects constitute my room boundaries. Currently I've set it to everything, so everything is going to affect it, and I can tell the analyzer how often it should check. Now this is 3 seconds, which might be a little bit too much. We have a very simple project here, so we can essentially kind of scale that down to the minimum, which is 0.1 sections. If I ever get into trouble and I don't know what's happening, there's an analyzer at the debug button here. So if I enable that, I can go into the game and I can actually check what the rays are that are casted in order to find the intersections with the room environment. I just leave that off, and let's essentially, there's one more thing I need to do. I need to go into the test audio, and in the test audio I need to in the settings of the DearVR source, I need to enable auralization. Auralization means that I'm essentially trying to figure out the reflections, the room reflections. Now I'm currently having a reverb set, so in order to make sure that I do not get confused with the reverb, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that off. There are a couple of different possibilities for reverbs. Obviously what I want to have right now is just reflections only. I just want to hear the reflections that are coming through the auralization here. I think that is everything I need for now. So let's hear how everything sounds. So let's press play. Now, in order to hear the reflections, what I need to do is I need to change the level of the reflections. Otherwise, you're not going to hear them particularly well, especially if you're listening to that on headphones or not on headphones. So let me go into the settings here, and I can change the reflection level. So let's push that up. So if I'm moving into the corner, I can sort of hear how these reflections are influencing the sound. Now I can play around with the individual settings and make sure that sort of the sound is as realistic as possible. Now, in general, that is not enough to really give that reverb effect. So what I need to do in addition to that, I also need to add a reverb, and for that I have the reverb settings in the DearVR plugin, and I can, here we are. I can essentially select from different types of reverbs. So let's just check something that's a little bit larger. Let's do a cathedral. That sounds like interesting. So let's hear how that sounds. And once again, in order to make that effect a little bit more noticeable, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the reverb level. So that way, essentially, I can do reverbs. Now, the auralization or the reflections are calculated dynamically, so I don't really need to do anything. That is done dynamically. However, the reverb, I need to set that manually. So currently, the way this is set up is that the reverb is just playing. In a real game development, what I would have to do is I would have to recreate the idea of reverb zones. So I would have to probably create a trigger area that when I enter that room, that the reverb kind of turns on with a transitional area where I change through a script, change the level of the reverb, and essentially just make that reverb play when I'm entering the room. Otherwise, the reverb is going to play constantly. Only the reflections, the auralization, is going to be calculated dynamically. So that essentially is important to know. Now, there's one more thing I just want to show, and that is in general what you would do is you would not necessarily run everything through the internal reverb directly. What you would like to do usually is to use reverb sense in the very same way we did that in the audio kinetic Weiss tutorial, and that can be enabled by simply disabling the internal reverb button. And that will then disable the reverb, the internal one, and it will allow me to send the reverb to a reverb bus. I've already prepared reverb buses here, and I can select how many reverb buses I'm going to have. Now in my particular case, I only have one. As soon as I have one, it's sort of picking that up, and I need to define the index, and that is actually an important thing. Each reverb bus has to have a reverb plugin installed on them, and I'm going to show that in a second. And that reverb plugin is going to have an index, and I need to tell the system which index that reverb bus is. So instead of naming the bus directly, I name the index of the reverb. Now I'm going to put it through reverb number 1. So this, as we're going to see, is going to have the room index number 1. So I'm going to do that. I can change the send if I want. And then in the reverb number 1, if I don't have that yet, I need to add the DearVR plugin. In the DearVR plugin, I need to make sure that that is also set to 1. So this is reverb number 1 with the ID number 1, and that is selected from the audio source, and its reverb is sent into that direction. And I can select the reverb here, and let's see, is there anything else I need to do? No, everything else seems to be okay. So let's play that. And I see in the mixing, in the audio mixer, that the reverb is active. I can change the, I can't do that here. Let me go back to the test audio. I can change how much reverb I'm going to send. So I can change the send here. And that essentially allows me to adjust the reverb. Now, once again, the way you would implement it in a game, obviously, is you would create your reverb zones through maybe trigger areas, and then have certain game states or game parameters that turn that reverb bus on or off, and that way you can essentially dynamically change the reverb. So once again, while the auralization is done in real time dynamically, the reverb is something that you need to switch on and off. And they're technically the same thing, but kind of from a practical perspective, computing a full reverb is very computationally expensive. So you couldn't do that in real, or at least with the approach that DearVR is taking, you couldn't do that in real time, and therefore they chose to kind of separate that out, or at least that's my guess, that they chose to separate that out into the auralization, where you calculate the reflections and then the actual reverb. And you can use either one of them. You don't have to use both. You can use reflections only, or you can use reverb only. Okay, that is pretty much everything I wanted to say today. If you have any questions, let me know. If you like that video, press the like button. If you get value of these videos, please consider subscribing. And other than that, see you at the next video.